Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. Hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I got with me today Dorian. So today's guest didn't just flirt with the abyss. He danced with it, kissed it, and carved his name into its spine. Dorian is not your average psychonaut. He's a street-forged, grief-hardened, reality-hacking soulsmith. Born in the spiritual dead zone of San Bernardino, where broken dreams drip from power lines and silence screams louder than gunfire, Lou found God not in church, but in 500 milligram mushroom trips under flickering street lamps. While the world debated serotonin receptors, he was out there watching friends dissolve into madness, bodies drop, and souls burn out. Firsthand witness to the razor sharp edge of unsupervised psychedelic warfare. Then came his father's long, cruel death. Then came Western psychiatry's cold shrug. Then came the taste of the void, raw and unfiltered, a suicide note written in invisible ink. But Lou didn't vanish, he alchemized. Through breathwork, qigong, and pure rebellion of spirit, he resurrected himself, not with therapy, not with pharmaceuticals, but with the hard-won gnosis of a man who's seen the machine from the inside and lived to spit in its gears. Then came love, and then came loss, his life spitter, a soul shaking overdose that shattered him again and rebuilt him even sharper, more focused, more dangerous, more devoted. From those ashes came psychedelics, not just a platform, but an exodus route out of spiritual poverty. Lou is now a trauma guide, a death walker, a healing architect. He's worked with the grieving, the broken, the addicted, the warriors of the inner and outer battlefield. He's not here to coddle you. He's here to handle you the blueprint of your own transformation. Lou, thanks so much for being here today. How are you?
That was awesome, man. That's some writing. I see you're a writer.
Yeah, man.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
I think there's something beautiful, man. I think something when it comes to psychedelics allows us to not only be a better writer, but to imagine words differently, man. It's really changed my life.
Absolutely. Language is part of one side of ourselves. The Toltecs call it the tonal, right? That language, rational base of ourselves. Very cool. Yeah, I like the word smithing and really awesome art.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. So you've had an incredible road, Lou. Like you've lived many lives, it seems like to me, man.
Yep. Yep. I definitely lived more than one life in a lifetime, I would say. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny, one of the things you said, kind of the spiritual dead zone of San Bernardino, it's interesting because San Bernardino is a paradoxical place. I wouldn't call it a spiritual dead zone. I would say it can be. It's
Right?
definitely a dead end for many, many people. But it's interesting because it's the home of the arrowhead, right? You've got Arrowhead Lakes up there and Arrowhead Spring, and you've got the actual arrowhead on the side of the mountain. And one of our favorite places to do macro dose psychedelic journeys was on this foothill that kind of juts out right in front of the arrowhead. And it is anything but spiritually dead, which is interesting because you're in the midst of darkness, you're in the midst of a lot of suffering in San Bernardino, gangs and violence and the drug trade, of course, and corruption and aggressive policing and all kinds of things. And then in that, there is actually something very spiritual about that valley. And there's all kinds of energies there, both dark and positive. It's a very interesting place. But yeah, I started out on one path, kind of skipped to another path, sort of as you allude to in what you wrote there, and then kind of went full circle. And by no means any type of a comparison. It reminds me in some ways of the story of Siddhartha a bit.
Mm.
In that I started in, I would say, a very spiritually aware place in my life in a kind of ironic situation because my parents were, I would call them intellectual atheists. And that was part of the driving force as well because my father was a psychologically, emotionally, and even potentially physically abusive man. He didn't beat me and my mother, but he would get into road rages on the road and be drunk. He would drive very intoxicated, almost killed us one time over the Kern River. And so my father was not emotionally intelligent at all. He had no emotional real awareness. He had only a couple of gears. You know, he was angry or in a state of joy, and that was about it. You got like anger, rage, sometimes joy when he was drinking around his friends, and not a whole lot of range in between. Sometimes he was depressed. He got very depressed about, ironically, my choices with psychedelics. He thought I was making terrible mistakes. So it's very ironic where I'm at now. My mother actually even supports what I'm doing now. It took decades, and she's still alive. But yeah, so it started there, right? And without getting into the weeds, we can get further into the weeds wherever you decide you want to dig in. But just to kind of fly over, I was growing up in that violent area. I actually went to junior high at Martin Luther King Junior Middle School Academy, which is on Medical Center Drive there. Sadly, Martin Luther King's legacy is another irony, right? That the worst neighborhoods of most urban areas are named after him, and instead of the great areas of people thriving and experiencing a wonderful life, it's usually in low income people that are being disenfranchised and having a terrible experience. And so I was bussed off to Martin Luther King Jr. And that was where I witnessed my first stabbings, my first shootings, my first drug deals and things like that around the 5th grade. So that interest, kind of led to an interest in martial arts. My early martial arts teacher had a belief that I still to this day believe is true, that certain mindset frequencies, however you want to describe it, could lead to higher levels of capability of being in what we would call now flow state, right? The Japanese samurai called it mushin, a state of being in this heightened ability to adapt to what's in front of you. And just that feeling of being on point, being, it's hard to talk about it, but athletes talk about flow state a lot, and that's the way I would describe it. That was what I was after. I found out I was pretty young at this point. I was about 12 years old when I met this instructor, and then found out a couple years later that he was using psychedelics in secret with some of his more long-term students for supercharging his meditation sessions in attempt to achieve this flow state. And I immediately became interested, and it was two parts. I wanted I wanted more capability. I wasn't a very large kid, I wasn't big. I was definitely dealing with violence often, dealing with gang violence, being jumped for lunch money. I often had my lunch money stolen every day in the locker room. Yeah. And I wanted to, gain some capability there. So I jumped into using my first experience with psychedelics was LSD in 1995. That was all the way in high school at that point, so I didn't jump into it right away. I read about it. I had done meditation for a number of years as a young adolescent, and then I got my first experience, and that was the beginning. And it was also motivated, like I said, the home life was empty to me. Also my parents were older, so they're from kind of the just post depression era. And the mentality was you work hard. If you got the opportunity to get some education, that's what you do. And that's all life's about, saving your money, creating a career for yourself, making sure you always have a job to go to. But that felt really empty to me. Like, what are we doing this for? It was interesting. There's a purpose in life, I think, for everyone. And for me, at about 7 years old, I actually already disliked society. I already felt like something was wrong. Something was hypocritical. Yeah. Something was off. The way school felt, the teachers.
Yeah.
There was each teacher had their own biases, whether it was a gender bias or even a racial bias in some cases, or whatever their deal was. It didn't seem fair. It didn't seem impartial. There was all kinds of things I noticed. I didn't like the institutional feeling of it. It didn't seem right that we had to sit in school for all these hours in that chair when we're kids and should be outside running around. I felt it all, and I was like, this is all BS. So all of that merged with utilizing psychedelics, and it was a very stigmatized time. It still has some stigma behind it, but in those days, it was, you're damaging your brain, you're 5150 after one tab of acid, legally insane. right? You're frying your brain. You never come back. There's always the the urban myths of the one guy who thinks he's an orange, and
Totally.
right, he's an orange for 30 years since the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the time frame, being a kid, you tend to feel a bit invincible. So there was a lot of boldness there, and went ahead and started using psychedelics, and I went really, really, really far with it. Yeah, I took very large macrodose experiences. There was the emerging rave scene in the 90s. I was in San Bernardino. There was a lot of poor kids that didn't know any better and would ingest datura in a really ill-advised way. And there was some really bad outcomes there. I ingested datura very intentionally. I read about it. I read about the Toltec shamanistic use of it. And then I ingested datura a handful of times in my life and had nothing but very positive experiences. In fact, datura shaped my kind of theories on reality and consciousness to a very high degree, possibly more so than any other of the psychedelics out there. Extremely powerful experiences with datura. So I had that. Because of the seriousness with which I took datura, though, I didn't have the same boldness and recklessness that I did with things like LSD and psilocybin. I was reckless, really irresponsible with LSD and psilocybin, I would say. And those two main ones were the main. You have to understand too, like I didn't have a lot of money, so there was a lot of friends of mine doing a lot of MDMA in the rave scene. MDMA was expensive. LSD was much cheaper. And it was more where my head was at. For me, I was still always seeking that flow state. And I found it with LSD oftentimes. I also found personal hell at times and some real difficult times with it. So, it was a mixed bag. And you're right. We did get to witness people snapping into psychosis during those time frames. Some of them never making it back. Some of them going into psychosis, then because of their parents' intervention, being introduced to Western psychiatric medicine, being doped up on a lot of neuroleptics and SSRIs and all those type of things, lithium, and then at least a couple friends died as a direct result of mostly improper use of the medication, starting, stopping, and then having a heart failure of some sort with lithium. That's particularly dangerous, and a few others. Others committed suicide. Some just never were really functional again. Or were limited in functionality and were just completely changed. So that was, that added layers to the experience. I still had a ton of positive experiences to draw from, but also saw some very negative things. And then, like you mentioned, my father did, pass away. Now, during this time, because of San Bernardino, there was always a certain amount of involvement with illicit trade, selling and trading in marijuana. The time was very illegal, psychedelics, all types of illicit substances, because as kids in that neighborhood, we didn't have a lot of money, and we're always trying to pay for going to a rave, getting some more, LSD, getting some more weed, getting some supplies. Back then, that was what it was all about. And, my parents weren't really funding any of this, or I wasn't provided a lot because of that Depression era mentality too. I wasn't given a lot of stuff. A lot of the kids that came from somewhat more, middle class affluent families, they were given a car and they were given money to go to like Havasu and have these type of experiences. We weren't living that life. We were out in Joshua Tree eating 5 tabs of 200 mic LSD and going for it. So, and that was what we were doing. But yeah, so that period was a lot of fun and also eye-opening to some of the dangers and no mentorship. That's also important, right? We had no indigenous mentorship, no, and here's where it gets really scary. The martial artist that I told you that kind of was the reason. I wouldn't say he introduced me to psychedelics because he didn't do it intentionally. He never encouraged me to take psychedelics. I just found out he was doing it. He ended up committing suicide as a result of really losing control himself. Yeah, I think a few things happened. Some of it's murky water. Apparently, he was in the British Virgin Islands and was smoking a joint or something and killed someone in a car collision. Came home. He was teaching at the local college there at Cal State. and may have had a brain bleed, but also seemed like he was. The rumors were he was taking shoe boxes full of mushrooms a week, like just going crazy. I don't know all the other things he may have been ingesting. And then he got naked on campus, was fired, went out of control, and then ate a bullet. So that that was frightening because this was like a mentor for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And then he lost his way. And so that was kind of pivotal and important because then when my father went through his bout with cancer, that was when things really changed. A lot of the psychedelic experience that I was having was in an environment where there was really not a lot of personal responsibility, and there was a lot of friction at home because of that, where that personal responsibility was trying to be foisted upon me to, man up and, find that career that my parents always wanted me to find. And there was a point in which I was actually homeless for a while where I just left home and didn't want to do it. And then that was actually the happiest time of my life, still this day. Sometimes I wonder if and this is without what has become my main lens to view life. I didn't have a lens of skill development. There's a way to be skilled at almost anything, including being, I don't know if I'd use the term homeless or whatever you want to call it, but living a more transient gypsy lifestyle. You can develop the skill around that. I didn't see that as a potential way of living my life at the time. I just knew I was at odds with society, and eventually I caved to pressure and I actually started taking school seriously and taking that career path seriously. After living on the streets, after waking up with hypothermia, sometimes I slept in cemeteries. They were kind of peaceful. Sometimes I slept in places like that. And that led to me going, okay, this is looking pretty rough. Like waking up with hypothermia is rough in the summer when it's hot. San Bernardino's in the desert valley there. It's really unpleasant. So eventually I caved. And once I did, I was leading kind of a double life during that time period. So I'm going to school, taking it very seriously. My parents were supportive of that, of course. And then I'm on the side going to raves. At this point, we had shifted to like a monthly. It was every month we did what we called a good old. And we go out to the desert and we drop. The standard was 5 tabs of LSD. Back then, they were usually mic'd around 200 mics. So it's 1,000 mics of LSD. And that was once a month. And that was kind of the double life I was living because I would hide that from my parents, hide that from society at large, go to school, was getting straight A's, right? Because now I was taking it seriously. And then my dad got sick. I was actually on the road at this point, was going to graduate school, was on the road to a PhD in mathematics, following in his footsteps, not because I wanted to. It's just, I'll just do whatever, I'm just going to do whatever. And meanwhile, living this other life. And then also involved in illicit trade. I was ramping up at that point into the marijuana trade. It was a very dangerous world back then. Anytime you're involved in any type of illicit trade, the truth is anytime you're involved in any type of cash business, period, it doesn't have to be illicit. If you're involved in a person-to-person cash transaction, you're engaging in something dangerous. And, I got to experience a lot of danger. I got involved with firearms. There was times when I was carrying firearm everywhere I went. And so living that life too, right? So, and here's the weird thing, I didn't share this part. So my father had hidden from me that he was actually, we will never know the full depth, but he was involved with the Italian mafia on some level. So my dad was born in Manhattan, actually, but raised in New Jersey, born in 1930. And so that's kind of heyday. By the time he was 10 years old, it's 1940. He wasn't old enough to go to World War II, but he was experiencing that heyday of the mafia. And apparently he was collecting the numbers collection for one of the Manhattan families. We don't know which one. He kept it very secret. He did share it with my mother. That's the only reason I know about it. My mother's very interesting, her own personality. It all lends itself to, all this stuff's so important. I won't get too detailed, but it's all important because it shapes who you are.
Yeah.
At such a deep level. So, my mother was very good at blocking things out because when she was about 12 years old, her mother had a brain tumor in the early 1950s. It was a benign tumor, but it was growing very quickly. At that time, they thought you could starve a tumor. So she fasted for 30 days thinking it would stop the tumor growth. Of course, it didn't. Then they had to perform this brain surgery. Now it's a little too late. She was blind, epileptic, lost her sense of smell. And for many years, it was very, very frightening that she was going to die. My mother was very young. Her older sister was much older. So she was, out of the house over 18, wasn't very helpful. So my mother learned how to block things. So when my father, at some point during her meeting of my father was older than my mother by 9 years. My dad was very quiet about his past. He had joined the Korean, he had joined the military during the Korean War, and that is a clue, because joining during that period is really interesting. Why you would do that? It's because he was escaping something. You know, he never framed it that way, but it's clear that's what was going on. He was living a criminal lifestyle, and the hints I got when I was a kid, when he would say things to me about the path I was choosing, he would say, you know, all my friends are dead or in prison. All his friends from high school were dead or in prison. When somebody tells you that, it's a clue. I have a similar story. Most of my friends are dead or in prison or addicted to drugs. So that's a clue to something about my life, that there's a bit of an iceberg there that you might not be seeing unless I really get into it. My father never shared these things, but that was an undercurrent as well that was going on. The interesting thing about him not being forthright, honest, and explaining his life and the choices he made is that I kind of ended up following in his footsteps a little bit, actually choosing that criminal path.
Yeah.
That he wanted me not to choose. His point was to try and get me not to do that, and that was he went about it in the wrong way. As I said, he had a lot of unresolved trauma, a lot of process work that he never did. He never learned a lot of things about this. So even though he was a doctorate in mathematics, he had no understanding or skill set within this area of emotional, spiritual life. So that was really interesting. So now I'm involved in this criminal lifestyle, right? And that was throughout my life, because I was exposed to it at junior high level. And, you know, whenever I needed money, it was an easy fallback, because everyone, I don't want to say everyone, but a lot of people in San Bernardino, there are guys I grew up with now who are border patrol agents, who are cops now, who are such liars. It's amazing. I'm like, dude, you were smoking weed and doing drugs. You know, some of them were even doing crazy stuff like robbing people, and now it's wild that these people, you know, and they act like none of it ever happened.
Right.
Like that was San Bernardino. So, you know, it was an easy fallback to just make some extra money. You could take some risks and make money. So that was always part of it. So what happened was my dad died. I lost all interest in the math career. I actually got hired by the government for a while as a recommendation from someone in my graduate program, and I worked for the government for about a year. I hated it. I was in a cubicle job. It was worse than the movie Office Space. It was the most soul-sucking, depressing experience of my life. It was just awful. My dad was dead. My love life was terrible. Dating was no good.
Right.
So many things were awful. I experienced some of my first injuries. They're definitely psychosomatic. I would say my back started to be a real problem. Sitting in a cubicle all day long. So I got myself fired. I didn't exactly quit. I got myself fired pretty intentionally. Was sleeping in my car on the base. I actually worked on a base. I had secret clearance. Got my unemployment check and bought a pound and a half of British Columbian weed and went straight into the trafficking business for a good from about from about 03 to 17, about 17. So about 14 years I was doing that. And I was in a hostage situation in 07, end of 07. A deal went wrong and these guys were going to kill us. They were Bloods from Delman Heights. And someone who was an intermediary connection was feeling the deal out. Guy I very much respected and liked a lot, and sadly found out just recently he passed. I didn't know. I lost touch with him a while ago. He had kept telling me, hey, I'm working on this deal, but something's not right. I don't think we should move forward with it. He got in trouble. He had a new wife and a brand new infant child in the house. He went to jail. She started approaching me saying, hey, I got to make money. You know, Ronnie's in jail. I got to support our household and feed the baby. You know, what about this deal? And I was like, well, talk to Ronnie. She lied to me. She was like 21 years old. She said she went to the jail and talked to Ronnie, and Ronnie okayed it. He had not okayed it. These guys were going to kill us. It's a whole lead up. We can go into the details of all that, but basically it went really south. They tied us up. They were going to execute us. That's a very psychedelic experience. I snapped into a different wavelength in which I knew we were going to die. I was like, we're done, but I'm not going to give that to them on their terms. And I was able to, that's a very psychedelic experience. That became a moment where I became at one with something much larger than myself. And then we survived that. Again, flying over, I don't want to get into the details, we can come back. So that experience, so that's just setting the tone of explaining the life. And during this time period, I'm not engaging with psychedelics. I wasn't, in fact, because of my father's death, and I kind of didn't even really go into this, and I won't go too deep into it, because of my father's death, you had mentioned in that introduction you wrote that, you know, I experienced my own mental health challenges and psychiatric Western care was a disaster. They brought forward more of that stigma around psychedelics, because I was really scared at that point when the panic attacks started happening, the anxiety disorder, the depression, and what it all came down to is a total lack of skills. So I had never been prepared for grief. I'd never been prepared for death. No one had ever really, as someone that close, you know, and with the difficulty in the relationship, it was a very complex relationship with my father. That led to major mental health challenges. So going into that and then experiencing the Western psychiatric medical care, I was told that I was brain damaged. Now, this is without a brain scan, without anything. Because I had been very forthright, I was like, look, here's my history. I've done a ton of LSD. I've done all these psychedelics. I don't know what's going on with me. Something's wrong. First, I thought I was having a heart attack. It's really funny because my dad, before he died, my family, it's kind of interesting. They loved the show Sopranos. Well, at the time, that first season, Tony Soprano's having his first panic attacks. And my panic attacks completely coincided with that. I was also living a triple life at the time and engaging in criminal activity. So it was really interesting, but I couldn't relate to it. And I didn't even understand some of the therapy sessions with him and Dr. Melfi. Like, I would watch the show with my parents sometimes, and I was like, I don't understand how this makes sense. How is he passing out? And then it's happening to me. It was happening to me. So I went through these doctors, and I went through the same thing. I thought I was having a heart attack. Nothing wrong with my heart, right? And then it gets almost more frightening, because then after a while, I was having 15 panic attacks a day or more, to the point of like vomiting, almost losing consciousness, couldn't get behind the wheel, have a panic attack and almost not able to drive. You're going to hyperventilate and lose consciousness while, you know, on the freeway or something. So, you know, then when you realize it's not physiological, then it's almost worse, because you know, you feel like you're completely losing your mind, and that's almost scarier. Then that's what almost led to the suicide. So, and there was other things. My father, one day in a really dark mood, maybe a few months before he died, he was like, "Oh, you're just having a bad day. You're gonna have a lot more of those. Just settle in and get ready. Like, this is what life's about," type thing. I was like, "Oh God, that's just terrible." You know,
it's crazy.
It's crazy.
So let me pause you right there for a minute, Louis.
So
like, you know, it's so interesting to me to get to see the way psychedelics play a role. Like, it almost sounds to me, even the recreational part of your psychedelic use was medicinal in a way. You know what I mean by that? Like, growing up in the lifestyle that you did, having the parents that you did, making the choices that you've made. It seems to me that even the recreational aspect was medicinal. Like, what would you say to that?
You know, I think that's why, like, when we're doing this, it's like flying over and then it's coming. Let's look at a key point. Let's dig in, and let's dig into this key point. Okay. I think I've seen people that, and then, well, okay, even further. All right, time parameters.
Okay.
The amount of time we have to review the experiences and integrate them and understand what they mean in the context of our lives. So I've seen people that took psychedelics purely and completely and utterly in a recreational way, and including their viewpoint, and this is not my viewpoint to date, that psychedelics are a drug. I don't think they're a drug, they're a spirit, but we'll get into that later.
Right,
the point is, right, their mentality at the time, and this was never really my mentality, so it's important, you have to understand this. Their mentality in this very vague example, there were several people like this, were taking a drug purely for recreational purposes, the way you might play a video game or you know, go ride a skateboard as a kid or whatever, just pure recreational, just purely on board, I'm going to do this. And in the context of that experience, many of those experiences didn't go well for some folks. Sometimes it did, went great, they just had a blast. But a lot of times, you know, there definitely were negative outcomes there. And within whatever the time parameter was, it could even just be a few years, even where you're like, wow, that was just recreational and seems to have no value.
Right.
But maybe we expand that out 10 years. Maybe we expand that out 15 years, and eventually we come back around and you see, wait a second, if that person finally integrates that experience, if that person starts to find their path with emotional, spiritual process work, then all of a sudden that experience that was deemed as purely recreational is no longer that. There actually was value there they never saw.
Yeah.
And it's very personal and subjective, because I can't, from the external side of that, look at that. Now, from what you're saying about me, it's a little different in the way that we talk about it, because you have to remember where I began with psychedelics. So I lost my path with psychedelics. Let's be clear that during the rave years, there was a consumption, aggressiveness. There was an escapism even that doesn't work real well with psychedelics. When you're trying to escape something with psychedelics, that path tends to be cyclical and bring you back around to facing some things. So, even though I kind of lost my path, remember my initial starting point was a spiritual path. It was one of the martial artists, the martial arts hero's journey. Is what the journey I was on. And the stories like Musashi, right? The Musashi tale of, youth and impatience and lacking wisdom to eventually achieving maturity and wisdom and actual skill and the ability to tap into that that unspoken realm, that place that's ineffable. That was the journey I was on. And then also reading books like Siddhartha and reading, books about the Mahakarames, the Huichol shamans, and reading about these things was my perspective. And there's these legends and lore of these shamans or even sorcerers throughout the conquistador period that are, for me, they were the heroes, right? So I wasn't. When I lost my path at the highest level, there were times when I was just ingesting, but they're always in the back of my head, this idea. So I wouldn't call it exactly just recreational. Every experience I had, whether good, bad, or completely just losing my way, has turned into making me who I am today. Absolutely. So they all have this major importance, no matter what the intention was at the time of taking it, and no matter how ill-advised or reckless it was. Now I'm thankful because I'm here. I survived. I didn't die. I'm not brain damaged. I don't, that was crazy talk from those Western medical professionals. But yeah, that you're right. I think that every single one of those experiences is some sort of building block at this point.
Yeah, I couldn't. It's interesting too, the idea of, like, when you look at the world today, Lewis, and you see like this world of like integration and therapy, and then you look back at how you came up. You're taking like 1,000 mics at Joshua Tree without anybody running around telling you how to do it or how to explain it. Like, it was sort of self-discovery. Do you think that maybe in today's world, like the whole commercialization of it, or just this wave of it, is a little bit too orchestrated? It kind of seems like the medical container on some level is really trying to wrap its arms around something that should be a really personal experience. And I know there's people that need it. I realize people that have real mental issues and people that may need that medical container. I'm glad it's there for them. But for the average guys, maybe we're missing out on like the self-directed experimentation. What's your thoughts?
I think that in this case, what's happening is this kind of East meets West, maybe a little bit. The Western, I would say this one very famous quote encapsulates what the problem is, and that would be Rene Descartes' quote, "I think, therefore I am." It's a false statement made by a man who was a thought leader of his time, right? A philosopher, a mathematician, all these things. And then it was fully and entirely embraced by the Western thinking world. And this is what kind of cuts to the root of what I was saying about the tonal, there's another side called the nogwal, which is the infinite, and the tonal is the. It took me many years to understand what these terms meant. I actually was reading about all this stuff and I didn't fully understand it, and it took me all this time and reading guys like Eckhart and others to finally understand what the tonal is and what it means to clean the island of the tonal. It's even more interesting idea that took me a long time to figure that out. What's happening is the Western world is trying to take their very focused, diamond sharp lens of thinking and apply it to psychedelics in this science-based, we're going to logic everything out way. And the problem with both science and religion, in my opinion, on opposite sides of the coin, is that their belief is that they have all of the answers, or if they don't have all the answers right now, they eventually will have all of the answers. And the difference between that and my understanding of certain types of indigenous thought on this is that there is a realm of knowledge that can never be known. So there's like 3 layers of knowledge, 3 levels of knowledge. One is what we know. One is what we're attempting to find out, the unknown, but possible to figure it out, and then the unknowable. And I think what psychedelics bring you into contact with and experience with is the unknowable. And what that means is it's purely experience. There's no way for me to ever communicate it to you, whether it's through mathematics or whether it's through any type of communication. I'll never be able to encapsulate it, put in a book, set it on a shelf as a piece of knowledge that humanity can contain. That will never happen. And so because of that, that's why I think the indigenous approach to psychedelics is, they are the original, folks that were interacting with these spirits in from the earliest times and have thousands of generations of handed down knowledge there that is not that logical, laser focused idea that we're going to Rubik's Cube this thing. It's not that at all, right? There's this intuitive side. And that's what's important. I mentioned Musashi earlier. The stories of Musashi are similar, and it's not engaging with psychedelics, but clearly he's doing some sort of lengthy meditations when he's off in the woods training himself. It's a really interesting idea that this guy oftentimes is not training with others to develop his swordsmanship. He's actually alone, taking freezing cold, baths in these, mountain streams, these snow melt streams, and living with nature for months and months on end alone, finding himself. That then these stories emerge. One of the famous ones is when he's invited to tea at one of the daimyo's castles, the warlords, because he had all these friends at the end of, later in his life when he was kind of done with his dueling days, who then wanted to see how good he was. And so one of the stories, which is great, it's depicted in Eiji Yoshikawa's book, Musashi, one of these daimyos invites him, he meets him, in kind of the ant room of his castle, and he says, "Hey, how you doing, Musashi?" And Musashi greets him. And, prior to the meeting, the daimyo has talked to some of his warriors, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to play a little joke on Musashi. We're not going to hurt him or anything, but hey, I want you guys to hide in this room. Let's see how good he is. And then I'm going to invite him to tea. And when we walk down this corridor, I want you to jump out and be like, hey, I got you," which is kind of a dangerous thing to do to a man like Musashi. Anyway, what happens is Musashi arrives, he meets him, they speak for a moment, and the daimyo invites him to tea and says, "Hey, follow me to the tea room." But Musashi, instead of following him, ends up doubling back out the doors he came in, walks through the courtyard out front, and enters into the tea room from a different direction. And by doing that, he avoided the ambush in the hallway. And they all come out and they're like, "Wow, how are you that good? How did you know?" And there's verified written evidence that, he was ambushed by 100 men on a trail after one of his really famous duels in which he defeated one of the biggest martial arts schools leaders, and all these guys were petty and angry about it. So they tried to kill him on the road and didn't succeed. So, this guy was at a level of, he's kind of like the Japanese warrior Jesus in a way. He's really something, Musashi. And the point is, right, is that how do you do that? That's not logic. That's not science. You're not going to science that. You're never going to fully understand that. You might get closer and closer to understanding it. I don't think that it lacks value to attempt to apply the science lens to things, because you do make discoveries that are important discoveries. And I think science helps us, especially when you start to get into things that are like quantum mechanics and quantum physics, that it helps you to shift your beliefs a bit. When you're stuck with limiting beliefs about this hardened perception of reality that turns out reality is far more malleable than we believe it to be, I think that's helpful, because many people are stuck in some limited mindset that's really harming them and harming others around them. So there's a good side to it, but yeah, you're right. The structure that's trying to be brought to this idea of psychedelics, I don't think within the real usage of it. So nerding out about psychedelics is very different from engaging with psychedelics and actually doing it, right? It's kind of like, I'm a martial artist again, right? It's like if you're hitting focus pads and you're doing a type of training, it's very different than when you step into that cage and actually fight, say, a cage fight. It's not the same thing. And no matter how many pads you hit and how many drills you do, it doesn't really prepare you for an actual cage fight. For that, you're going to need to actually fight and get in there. And there's ways of doing that aren't as injurious, but you do have to actually engage. So I think psychedelics are somewhat the same way. You can nerd out all you want, but don't confuse it with the idea of what actually taking psychedelics is about. And then, you know, when you look at real shamans and people who have decades of, you know, functional use of psychedelics, I think there are sides of that experience and that skill set they have that you won't ever fully be able to understand, because of my belief that they're engaging with the unknowable, and they have a way of conduiting that and using that in a healing way, in a protective way, that I think you have to leave the science at the door at some point.
Yeah, it's an awesome answer. What was your thoughts on, like, you're just coming back from Psychedelic Science 2025, as am I. What are your thoughts on that, on the whole kit and caboodle over there? What'd you think?
Man, you know, it's a funny thing that you're asking that question, because you know, I'm going to say some things.
Okay, nice.
This is where it gets interesting, right? Let's talk about credit where credit is due. Let's talk about things like what we're seeing mentioned around indigenous tribal communities, where we need to show gratitude, give credit, give, you know, sacred space to, right? We have to realize that without the indigenous community and tribal folks, we wouldn't understand this stuff, or be, you know, even have this as part of our potential repertoire for healing and integrating it into our society. And there's a lot of, you can see the rhetoric out there, certainly in MAPS. It's in a lot of places where, like, hey, we need to make sure that the indigenous communities aren't just trampled and overrun and pushed to the side. And I agree with that 100%. But you know what MAPS may not realize, and I saw it firsthand? MAPS wouldn't exist without the people who broke the laws of prohibition for 50 plus years. And what I witnessed at MAPS were people who, yes, they were breaking the rules right on the showroom floor. And I think they are in a difficult political environment and enforcement environment where MAPS needs to be careful. I understand that. But they treated people at that show like common criminals. And I don't know if this is true or not, so I'm going to give a little disclaimer there. But a man that I really respect because of his boldness and who he is, and his time being involved with the psychedelic movement, is a man named Paul Karasik. Paul is involved with you know, a lot of different aspects of the psychedelic world, and has something called Awakenings, or Awaken. I think it's Awaken in Los Angeles, where he does his own smaller events, kind of trade shows and things like that. He's got an organization called the Psychedelic Institute in Los Angeles. He's also got a product line. Paul's like 75 years old, maybe even older. He was thrown out of the MAP showroom floor like a common criminal. He told me, and I tend to believe, Paul, that the main point of contact there was a man who claimed to be former DEA, was hired as a consultant by MAPS to enforce the rules on the showroom floor. I find that to be in extremely poor taste. If you're going to work, towards enforcing rules that may be important politically and in the current regulatory environment, I understand that. But understand this: MAPS doesn't exist without guys like Paul. MAPS doesn't exist without guys who made LSD available, made MDMA available, made mushrooms available to people in a time when you went to prison, you may have even lost your life, you lost your livelihood, lost your family, lost everything. And because this idea of drug dealers have been lumped in with murderers, rapists, and child molesters, that's got to stop. I'm sick of that. There are plenty of really good people who are drug dealers, if we want to call them. And so, yeah, that rubbed me the wrong way. We had display cases up because we had our booth sponsored by by actually a couple of our product merchants on the website, on the platform. I was approached by that same man that threw Paul out, and that guy spoke to me the same way. And even when he didn't get the answers he wanted, it almost seemed like the guy wanted to go hands-on. He went to full law enforcement cop mode. And I let him know. I was like, that's not going to fly with me, buddy. Like, I've been to prison twice. I've been through this whole thing. I know this inside and out. You are not going to play with me like that. And it was a sad thing. There was another side of this. Look at this part of it. And this is one anecdotal experience from me, who was running a booth, who didn't get the opportunities to go to the sessions, to go to a lot of the talks and seminars, because I'm operating a booth. It's when you're operating a booth, you're so engaged in that.
Yeah.
So you're not getting to see so many other experiences, and very positive ones, I'm sure. I don't want to sound completely negative, but this particular aspect does rub me really the wrong way. Another thing that happened was a friend of ours that I really like, a guy named Joe. He just had that ancient bee god, mushroom god tattooed on his forearm. If you know what I'm talking about, it's got like some sort of deer head with mushrooms popping out all over it. It's an old glyph on a cave somewhere. He had that tattooed, and Paul Stamets will show that sometimes. In fact, during his talk, he showed it on his, he had it up as one of his visuals on his screen. Our friend Joe went and got his book signed by Paul, went and spoke to Paul, showed him the tattoo. Paul was stoked. They stood up and talked a little more. Paul initiated, gave him a hug, and security, came out of the woodwork and was like, "Hey, no contact, no contact." Like, whoa. This kind of celebrity, not what psychedelics is about. This kind of like, oh, this person's some sort of god that can't be touched, that we're doing it all over again.
Yeah.
And, Paul, for instance, that was thrown out, he knows Rick Doblin personally and even spoke to him about being thrown out. And Rick was apologetic and was just like, "Hey, I'm sorry, man, that it's kind of out of his hands. Now what we're seeing is this thing is taking on a life of its own." And I would say there's some integrity being compromised there. One individual, his name's Ian. We partner with a business called Clinical Research. They're a nonprofit doing, they're starting with a clinical survey study on psilocybin efficacy in different modalities, including recreational. They're trying to understand, clinically speaking, what the results are, what the outcomes are, what the benefits are. And they want that to be the jumping off point to do a lot more actual research studies and clinical trials. They were at our booth, and because of who they are, the one woman there named Joanna, she knew a man named Ian. Apparently he's kind of a policymaker, a lobbyist. He rubs elbows with the actual governor of Colorado. He come over and tried to shame me for having our display up with products that said mushrooms on. He's like, "Oh, I think this is a really poor choice. I want to, be able to see events like this happening in the future, and I think this just damages it." And I didn't want to say anything to the guy, but I'm saying it right now. MAPS doesn't exist without us. Stop acting like you're better than the people who provided products for 50 damn years. That irritates me, because this is why I'm able to relate to the veterans. You talked about me facilitating for people. I've facilitated for several veterans now. Learned a lot about them. It's very interesting learning about PTSD and what really makes it tick. The reason I can relate to them is that I was part of a different war. I wasn't part of the war on drugs, and I saw real casualties. I've seen casualties for many different reasons, and I've experienced my own PTSD from it. So because of that, I have a little bit of that same gruffness, that grittiness the veterans have, and they can relate to me. Even though I wasn't an enlisted man, I wasn't in the Middle East, I wasn't in these places, I know they can sense it from me when they meet me. They're like, okay, you understand. Like, you're damn right. I get it. I watched people die. I've almost died myself. I've been there. I've seen it. To see our people who fought this clandestine war be lumped in with these, child molesters or like big cartel, that do these horrific acts, that is not who these people were. These people were providing products because they believed it was bullshit that the government made them illicit and made us unable to access tools that shouldn't be any of their damn business what I put in my body, whatever it is. It's my body. I should have sovereign discretion over what I put in my body. And I understand there's arguments about, the social aspects and impacts of addiction and things like that. But addiction isn't caused by substances. Addiction is caused by sociological unhealthy environments. That's what causes addiction. So that's what I have to say about that. We can go further into war on drugs and everything I saw at MAPS, but very disappointed. I lost some respect for MAPS, to be honest with you. I did. I really saw a side where, and here's one more part of this. And we can talk about the good side of MAPS. Like, there's great people there, amazing people. We had some awesome interactions, got to network further. It certainly helped boost our business. Without MAPS, this psychedelic movement wouldn't be to the degree of where it's at now and where we're making it. So there is credit due there. But I'm concerned that as that progression is happening and as they've gained more power, money, and influence, that unfortunately there's a rather predictable trajectory there unless there's enormous, almost samurai-like values and convictions. You have to have enormous convictions and values to not allow the power and influence and money to affect your integrity. And I think there's some integrity being affected. And let me give you this one more rather ironic and humorous anecdotal experience. One of the girls that helped work our booth has some friends. She's actually a former facilitator at Soltara, the very large ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica. She left for a number of reasons. Soltara is really large. She had a friend in the Denver area that had some friends and contacts and experience, I guess, within the strip club world. So one night we're sitting there and she's like, hey, my friend wants to take us to the strip club. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to go to the strip club. The place is called Shotgun Willie's. I'm on mushrooms. So I took mushrooms to kind of reset in the middle of all this. And she's trying to get me to go to the strip club. And I'm like, man. And they kind of like tug me. So I'm like, all right, I'll go. We go to this Shotgun Willie's. I'm on mushrooms. I show up. There's this man at the front door. He's the front door bouncer, right? The doorman.
Right.
This guy's like 6'5", 370 pounds, a beast of a man, clearly very capable of violence. I walk up to him going, oh boy, here we go. And this guy's the most soft-spoken, gentle, awesome, positive guy. He's like, hey, come on in, guys. Enjoy yourselves. You need anything, let me know. Like, really friendly. And good, and it was a good vibe. It was genuinely good vibe. I'm on mushrooms. I'm feeling people in front of me. Right. We walk into the place, and it was a strip club. Women came up to me, tried to pressure me to lap dance, try to do all that stuff. People are drinking. But it wasn't, I can't explain it, but it wasn't dirty. I didn't get a dirty feeling from that place. Now, the next day, right, we left there. I didn't have anything to drink. I'm on mushrooms. I leave. I go home, get some sleep. Wake up the next day, getting ready to go to the showroom floor at PS 25. And there's this voice, very subtle whisper in the back of my head. It's going to be dirty there. It's dirty. What we're dealing with is dirty. And I'm like, I keep hearing this voice, right? And it's so subtle, I'm almost not listening to it. And the closer we get to the event, we Uber there, the more I'm feeling like this grossness in my gut. We get into the event. I start feeling faint, dizzy, nauseous, right? I turn to Satya, that's her name. I go, hey, I'm really feeling nasty. She goes, yeah, me too. I don't feel good. She's a former facilitator, has worked with many shamans in Peru, Costa Rica. She always carries aqua florida with her. She's like, this place is dirty. and she's like, I'm going to do a cleanse. She does this cleanse with aqua florida on me. She does one on herself. She's like spitting the water down her front. She's like, doing this whole cleanse on me, has me sit down for a second. I ground, immediately started feeling better. Like had to wash that off. Then people start coming up. One guy, our whole booth started laughing. This guy comes up and he's very shifty and weird. I don't know if you've seen an old movie called Fallen, but this movie Fallen was with Denzel Washington. It's a story about this demon that infects people through contact. This guy was behaving like that. And one woman, not Sachi, the other one, she's like, this guy's got a hitchhiker. He had an entity on him. You could feel it. And he was just, it was so strange. The point is this, that the gold standard, right? The organization that's leading the charge with psychedelics had the dirtiest energy, dirtier than Shotgun Willie's. Okay, and hey, you want to get science involved and say that that's just me in my head and I was on a psychedelic and had some strange experience, and you can explain it away however you want. I've been involved with psychedelics for 30 years now, and I'm telling you, the energy on that showroom floor was nasty. And hey, take it as you will, take it how you want. But there's a lot of good that MAPS has done. Like I said, without MAPS, the movement at large and where we are today wouldn't be here. But I'm concerned about where it's headed. And I think that people now need to start speaking up for the material providers who made it possible. You don't have veterans with statistics on MDMA without people breaking the law. You don't have veterans with statistics on mushrooms without people breaking the law. You don't have those statistics without those chemists and those distributors risking their lives to make this possible. So I'm kind of sick of what I saw there. So that's what I have to say about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it brings to the point. First off, it's hilarious. It's a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing it, man. It brings up so much. Like, where do you stand on like decriminalization versus legalization? Is it just sometimes I think it's bound to go back underground. Like it's a season. Psychedelics bloom the same way mushrooms do. They come above board when the conditions are right, but then they go back underground, and it just kind of gets distributed that way. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I haven't followed it really deeply, but in Texas, we started to see something with cannabis, right?
Yeah.
Tried to make it completely illegal again, from what I understand. It's not like I read the bill or anything. I think that it's always follow the money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's what it is. And there's in cannabis, for instance, which is, I think, far more two-dimensional than psychedelics, but is a good analogous example to look at to some degree.
Yeah.
For instance, to give you an example of a true life statement that the elected sheriff of Riverside, California made in an interview maybe a couple of years ago or something. He stated that at this time period in the year, the first quarter, second quarter, or whatever, that out of the prior 19 officer involved shootings, 17 of the suspects had marijuana in their possession. Obviously, he was intending to convey the message that marijuana was the reason for people being violent, bringing violence against police officers. An absolutely insane idea. That's just the most absurd statement that can ever be made. Why would he make that statement? Why would the sheriff of Riverside County make this statement? And I'll tell you what, the funding being lost for law enforcement, right? The allocated funds to interdict into cannabis is being lost. They're not getting that money anymore, and they're going to see a major reduction as legalization increases. And so what is their personal interest in this? They don't want to see it happen, right? They don't want to see it happen. And it's a way more complicated matrix than that, as far as all the moving parts and private or personal interests are concerned at group levels. So you got law enforcement interests, you got pharmaceutical company interests, you've got revolving door, rehab interests, you've got illegal cartel interests, right? Legalization does not support their interests. Although we're so far down the rabbit hole now, since, beginning with interdictions in the Pablo Escobar era to now we've created warlords. I'm a huge, I don't think it's hard to tell I'm a complete, anti-war on drugs advocate, because it's just clear it doesn't work, and it's caused far far more exponential harm than regulation and legalization ever would have caused.
Right.
So with psychedelics, I think, I think there's going to be interests that are not going to want to see going down, certain pathways. If what's happening with cannabis in Texas, do we really think that lawmakers think that cannabis is dangerous? Is there some ulterior motive there, right? If you make cannabis illegal and you crush the industry there, what happens? All those people who started businesses lose their foothold. And then later on, you legalize again, and who takes over then? I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but to me, that seems like a chess move you could make that would easily get rid of competition and then bring your corporate guys in with enormous wealth and power to then dominate that industry. And greed is amazing that people who already have way more than they could ever need will still try to take more for themselves is mind-blowing to me. So I think that same motivation unfortunately to influence psychedelics. And, we see with Compass Pathways and the efforts of Peter Thiel to patent crazy things, right? Patent eye shades during a psychedelic experience, patent muted colors in a room, patent, soft furniture with a facilitator sitting by your side while you're under the influence of a psychedelic experience. These are real patents. I mean, there may be more delineated in the actual patent paperwork, but they're pending before the patent office, right? Why would you do that? Why would you try to patent those things? It's obvious you just want to corner that market, right? And I don't even see, how could you even enforce those? I have no idea. But, right, like, I think that's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, to come back to the rational mind and just our species in general, we're rather easily programmable.
Yeah.
So when you're able to program people with propaganda and stigma and really get it in their heads that these are dangerous things, that you're destroying society, that your kids, and this is the most effective, right? Your kids are in danger. This could harm your children. Yeah. People immediately, once you say, oh, this could harm your children, oh, I'm going to vote no on this immediately, right? And I think that's the problem, where unfortunately there's not enough people who really embrace freedom. Freedom is scary. There's a civil rights attorney that I follow. In fact, I think his channel is called The Civil Rights Attorney, John Bryant. He does a lot of law enforcement excessive use of force cases, and he talks about that freedom's scary, that you really have to accept, safety is always the way we fight against freedom. The way we institute legislation is we go, oh, we need more safety. And the problem with safety is you can't have both safety and freedom. And so I'm more err on the side of education and training. And you can see it, and this is really important here. My theory about Purdue Pharma and oxycodone is that was something, that was an environment made right. The population was ripened for that disaster by being raised and indoctrinated into a complete skill vacuum. They had no skills around substances of any kind. Their only doctrine that they were indoctrinated into and programmed into was, if it comes from someone with a white coat, it's safe. If it comes from someone on the street, it's not. That's madness, right? Because you see what happened with Purdue Pharma and what they did to falsify, and manipulate these research studies into the addictiveness of oxycodone and the lobbyists and all the massive moving parts that were used to dupe the American public is insane, right? And that's because these people weren't skilled. If you're raised in education and skilled on substances, I can tell you right now, because I'm skilled in the use of all kinds of substances, not just psychedelics. I do not have, my girlfriend died from heroin. It was just prior before fentanyl really got big. I am not anti-opioid. Many of these people are like, oh, my family member died of this stuff. We need to give the death penalty to opioid dealers. We need to, this crazy stuff. And it's like, that doesn't work. What are you talking about? You're going to demonize this whole thing. The tool itself isn't the problem, right? Many people die in car accidents every year. Do we demonize the automobile? It's not how it works. And it's sad that we keep going down this road. What happened is we had an entire population of people raised on the Reagan's Just Say No and DARE and everything else, and were never skilled on what an opioid is. If I took that opioid, I don't care, give me a blindfold to have me swallow this pill, I would have told you within 2 hours. This is addictive. This is dangerous stuff. It can be used appropriately, I'm sure, but there's no way this is not addictive. I know what it is just by what my body would have told me. And because we've had this complete idea of restriction on all things, these people are not skilled. So now what you have is when you keep people roped in to this societal track, this is why I've always been a rebel my whole life, they're just easily swayed into, voting in alignment with what these bigger corporate interests want. And I think that's the risk to psychedelics. Unfortunately, we'll see what happens, but it's getting out there though, and it's going to be harder and harder to control. I think that's the problem with cannabis. You make cannabis illegal in Texas, okay, now what? You think these people are going to stop ingesting cannabis? It's similar to alcohol in the Volstead Act, right? It's all you're going to do is put more money in the pockets of the people operating illegally. There's a great scene in the movie, the series Boardwalk Empire, the very beginning of that show, with Steve Buscemi and all the big leaders of the time in Atlantic City and Manhattan and stuff. They're raising a toast because the Volstead Act has just been instituted into law, and they're like, congratulations, guys. Those guys in Washington are going to make us filthy rich. And they did. What did they do? They created the most powerful criminal organizations in history through the Italian mafia and all these things because they made alcohol illegal. And people weren't going to stop drinking. People aren't going to stop ingesting marijuana. People aren't going to stop ingesting psychedelics. It's just unfortunate. And that's why I just am trying to be this voice of awareness. And maybe some people hear what I'm saying and actually go, wow, that makes sense. It's hard to change people's minds. Very hard to change people's minds,
Yeah. It feels like a birthright to me. The fact that it would even be illegal seems obscene.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, what do you when I look around the world, it sort of looks like the late 50s or the beginning 60s. When you and I grew up as Xers, and like you got to see, or we got to hear echoes of the last sort of 60s revolution, where it spilled into artwork, it spilled into music, it spilled into the creative nature of the human spirit. And I kind of am, when I look around the world and I see the chaos erupting, I feel like I'm beginning to see that. What is your take on the future? Do you think that this spills out of the medical container and we begin to see some artwork and some music and sort of a more freedom-loving aspect of it?
It's a good question. I think it's hard within the course of one lifetime to really ascertain it. Oftentimes we can fall into either optimism or discouragement based off of the brevity of our own life experience and not seeing it from more of a almost geological time frame, right? We're evolving. There's no doubt about it. The 60s were different from the 90s. The 90s are different from the 2020s. There's some parallels and similarities, but they're different. And I think understanding just what those nuances and differences are. For our generation, it's funny. I remember there was a time when I was really getting into that interest and that real almost obsession with psychedelics, where I felt at times like, I missed out. I should have been born in this, I should have experienced the 60s. That would have been the better time for me. And then, and I don't know that that's true. The 90s were wild. They were their own experience, their own thing. And then you see things like, I think the danger in this, if you've ever watched the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if you notice, I'm kind of a film buff a little bit. I like cinema. I think there's great storytelling that goes on with the with actors and the way they portray stories. The sad thing about Hunter Thompson, that writing at the end of that movie, he talks about seeing the high watermark where the 60s and all that optimism receded, and you realize where his life ends, right? He commits suicide, sort of almost like Hemingway in a way. And it's like, you don't want to fall victim to that. I think that's where, here's a man who had enormous experience with psychedelics, right? And at the same time, you kind of get this sense maybe he's missing something in the psychedelic experience. Maybe he's missing the deeper connection, that this is the ebb and flow of the universe, and that you have to connect to something much deeper, more Taoist, more Buddhist in a way, something that's underneath, more indigenous, that these are the ebb and flows of life, and that consciousness is evolving. We're evolving consciously, and it's geological. It's not within the time frame of our individual lives, and we have to connect to a higher level of connection really that's what I think psychedelics allow us to do if we can integrate that different level of frequency understanding. Then we don't fall victim to these ebb and flows that happen. I think it's very likely we're going to see several more ebb and flows. We're very far from a civilization, a world civilization of people that are awakened at a higher level of consciousness. We're still very far from that. I would say we're in a current era that's about more than 10,000 years old, and I would call it the era of the ego. And that my perspective on this is that if we're going to become I don't even like the word dominant, but the inherited stewards of our world, of our environment, of this planet, that we manage this to the point of becoming an interstellar species, that we're going to have to overcome this thing I call ego. Ego is a loaded word because some people have an expanded definition that it's part of ourselves, that's inextricable and necessary. I think they're confusing the ego with the tonal, in my opinion. They're conflating the logical, rational mind that also incorporates identity with this other part of ourselves that I think is really only negative. This attachment to identity, attachment to future and past, or over obsession with future and past, and always in a state of competitive comparison. That particular part of ourselves, I don't think is positive in any way, shape, or form. That's what we're wrestling with. And until we eventually overcome that, one of a couple of things may happen. We may destroy our environment and destroy ourselves, and there'll be an evolutionary iteration. You and I may be little green or gray men containing consciousness from our past selves, right? Where's the consciousness of the dinosaurs? Where's the consciousness of the species before us? Did that consciousness just die out, fizzle out, and it's not even here anymore? Or is it contained within our conscious experience today? Is it part of the, evolutionary trajectory? And that's, a philosophical debate about the nature of consciousness. Is it panpsychism? Is it only generated in brains and neural structures? What is it, right? I have my beliefs. Other people have their beliefs. I believe that it truly is this continuing evolution that's part of a greater whole, and that the universe is headed towards this simultaneous awareness. And so in that very big picture perspective, we're going to continue to see these same back and forths until one day we evolve or we die, and our actual biology forces us to evolve to the next stage. And looking at evolution over geological time, it's only headed in one direction. It's been sophistication. It hasn't gone backwards. It might appear to go backwards if you look at it in short periods of time, but when you expand it over millions and millions of years, even billions of years, right? Here we are, and we're rather arrogant in thinking that we are this apex, level of evolution. I don't know that we necessarily are. We could achieve that, but we also might not make it if we keep going down this path.
Yeah, I think it's really well said. Let me jump into some of these questions we got people chiming in over here. Okay, this first one comes to us from Jenny. Jenny from Michigan. She says, "You speak about emotional processing. You speak about emotional processing journey work. What does that actually look like in the body? How does trauma move, speak, and release in the deep spaces?"
Right. So that's a really good question, and it's one of the 8 root fundamentals. We didn't even bring that up, but I've kind of authored 8 root fundamentals: mental, emotional, spiritual skill development. And the first root fundamental is exposing and processing past trauma. And it's definitely in the body. We have scientific evidence. This again is great. This is why I'm not anti-science or anything like that, or anti-logic or anti-Western, approaches. Schools of thought that emerged out of, Harvard School of Medicine, Oxford School of Medicine, places like this, really furthered our understanding that trauma is in the body. It's at the cellular level. It's in there somewhere. We don't fully and have a complete mapping of how that works, but we know it's there. We know from indigenous processes and ideologies. We know from Eastern processes and ideologies that there is a way to access, process it, and achieve some wisdom from it, and potentially transmute it. I am not an expert in emotional process work. You need to understand that. I'm not an expert in any of the 8 root fundamentals. I'm just someone who sees a picture and understanding. I do my own particular type of what I call process work, and I refer to it at times as journey work. That word journey work, or that term journey work, is really overused. Maybe it's not overused, it's just a vague term, can mean a lot of different things. For me, my exposure to what has been the most effective form of it, in my experience, has come from something I adapted and adopted from a woman named Brandon Bays, who wrote a book called The Journey, A Practical Guide to Healing Your Life and Setting Yourself Free. I never got to go to a seminar of hers. I think she's still doing these around the world in different places. Her process work is extremely powerful, especially in combination, and can be used with psychedelics. Now, it's interesting when you kind of interjecting psychedelics into the equation. It's not, this is where that personal life experience really plays a role. Sometimes it can hinder the process work, and sometimes it can supercharge it. And you have to assess who's in front of you and what's going on, and really figure out what's appropriate time-wise and context-wise. The type of work that I learned through that book, and then began doing hundreds of hours of work with friends, actually. My main design head of design for the website, he and I did the most work together, hundreds of hours of trading sessions with this particular process work. Developed a skill in doing that. And I would say, for brevity of understanding what it is, it's kind of a combination of guided meditation, hypnosis, and Gestalt therapy, kind of mixed into one. And it tends to be very, very effective. Now, there are other ways of approaching this. There's internal family systems, which has some overlap with the way that I do things. There's EMDR work, right? There's now facilitated ketamine sessions. There's probably combining a couple of these different things. There's breath work that's contained within Qigong that is a part of emotional process work, and understanding how to transmute and move that trauma throughout the body. When you ask, how does it work? How does it store? I don't think we know that actual answer. I think we know it does. I think we have the understanding that trauma is actually stored in the body. When I do the work that I do from Brandon Bay's particular brand of process work, she has two major headings or categories of that work. One is called the emotional process. One is called the physical process. The physical process is not actually physical. It's just that it's looked at through the lens of where in the body is the actual trauma stored, and what is the emotion there? What is the surface level emotion, and then what are the emotions underneath the surface level? And it's really interesting to see that people can store grief in their knee. People can store grief in their shoulder. People can store rage, in their gut. People can store, you can see that firsthand if you do this kind of work, and you incorporate certain types of approaches that do focus on that. Understanding how that works, I have no idea. I just know it does, and I know that in that moment, I just want relief for the person in front of me or for myself, and I know that emotion is stored there. And the interesting thing is, this is something that indigenous people have known for thousands of years, that the body, our body communicates. It has a language its own. Its language is not alphanumeric based language at all. It's a language of nuance. It's a language of sensation. And it's very, very complex, potentially more complex than any written or understood logical language. And that language incorporates everything from nuanced feelings, sensations, pain, different types of pain. All of these things are messages. And what we do through this process work is begin to learn the language of the body. What is my body telling me? And one of the things that our society has done is cut us off from our bodies and completely stopped us from understanding the language of our body. When I said I would know after one dose of oxycodone that it was addictive, the reason I would know that is the language of my body would tell me. I would know right away. How can I explain that language to you? I can't, because that language is not one I could communicate to you verbally, right? And so as you do this emotional process work and the journey of processing past trauma, you are beginning to go down the journey of learning the language of your body. You're learning a new language, and that's where the wisdom is in learning that language. And you're starting to go down that journey of becoming literate in some level. I don't know if I would even call it literacy, but you're learning a language. And so that's what I would say about that process. Understanding what are the actual, brass, bolts and nuts and underpinnings of how that works, I don't think I can put that into that terminology. I don't think I could frame it that way. I think it's a very subjective, very personal experience. We know that it's real. We know that you're storing trauma in your body, and we know there's several techniques in which you can approach it from. And there are some people who are absolute experts. You're right. And expertise is something that requires dedicated focus on one thing for many, many years, usually for thousands of hours of time. And I'm more of a jack of all trades. I've spent a lot of time developing things in many, many different areas, and now I understand kind of a larger picture understanding of it. But I can benefit always from meeting with experts who really take deep dives into some of this stuff. And so that's what I would say about emotional process work. I found something that works. When I, for instance, just to even add more context with the Qigong journey that I began when my father died, I met, it's kind of an interesting story. He was a man who was studying in China. He's actually a white guy who was the reason he went to study in China, because he was a student under Tony, who killed himself, who was the guy who had been involved with me to do them. And there was a big moment of shock for everyone that was a student of his. And he was one of the students who was really close, probably even I don't know if he did psychedelics with Tony, but when he died, it was a huge shock. So he went to China to get, some sort of understanding. He went and started training with his Taoist masters. When he came back, and then I started learning from him, he was like, look, it was like a 4,000 page book on 10,000 years of Qigong wisdom. He's like, look, you can read this whole thing and you can become an expert in Qigong, and you will never even become an expert in everything in this book your whole entire life. He's like, but you can also take three main Qigong exercises, adopt them into your practice, and that can serve you your whole life. That's where I'm at with emotional process work. I have a particular set of skills that I've adopted and I use, and it serves me very, very well. But I'm not an expert in emotional process work. For that, we need to get more people on and panel discussions, and people who spend their whole lives understanding this. Some people studying it from the research and clinical side of it. Some people maybe indigenous. Some people somewhere in between. And that is, that's how big it is, and that's how big each one of the 8 root fundamentals is. Understanding how to expose and process emotional trauma that definitely is stored in the body. To become an expert at that's your whole life. You'll spend your whole life doing it.
Yeah, I love the idea of the awareness and learning the language of the body, the experience. Louis, what about psychedelics, man? Tell us, what is that about? Like, when people come there, what do they do? Are they researching? Are they being able to find suppliers that are quality? Are they finding health? Are they finding help? Like, what if I come to psychedelics? Just say someone's listening to this and they come to psychedelics. What do they find there?
Yeah, so it's a huge idea, and that's why we've been at it for so long, right? We've been at it for 4 years, and we're still not to the actual vision. The full vision. We're coming close. You've got basically something almost like a cyber city.
Okay.
It's huge. We've got I think over 4,700 published web pages at this point. That's part of the entire network. Your first section is called the treatment section. That's where you're finding guidance and mentorship and treatment professionals to help you with your journey. Psychedelist. The name is important to understand and helps bring context to the role it fulfills. On the one hand, we're a community support list, a directory list, and advertising list. So psychedelist is a play on words. But on the other hand, think analogous side of language with someone who's very skilled at something. A physicist, a violinist, a pianist, someone who's spent many, many long, determined, dedicated hours to building a skill. Because of that, and those 8 root fundamentals that I haven't covered them all, but that framework that I'm operating from, psychedelics aren't the main focal point for psychedelics. Even though you would really think that's the case when you go on there, this is where it's really important that I keep getting the brand ethos out there. We don't just have psychedelic practitioners on there. We have meditation coaches, breathwork coaches, Reiki and energy healers, sound bath healers, and we want more to join. We have people who are integration coaches, strictly focused on preparation for psychedelic experiences. The 8 root fundamentals I outlined, they're not specific to psychedelics. They're specific to developing mental, emotional, and spiritual skills within what I would say is a fundamentally toxic society, that it's like a martial art. We're not living in a healthy society. If we were, our circumstances would be vastly different from what we're seeing around us. Broken healthcare system, huge wealth inequality, people without, not given any support in situations of, being unhoused, or like this. You asked me about decriminalization. That's a whole other thing. When we don't add layers of support, we just throw drugs at people instead of giving the sociological, tools that we need. The point is, right, that we've got a society that's fundamentally toxic. And so because of that, you need far more skill to maintain your mental health than you would if we lived in a far healthier sociological environment. So first and foremost is just mental health skills. And then those skills are supercharged or even more important if you're facilitating or engaging with psychedelics. So that's the idea behind the brand. And that's what we're trying to provide on that treatment side. We call it treatment, but it's beyond that. It's more mentorship, guidance in all kinds of areas. And we need more people to join. We're underserved on that. So that's one side. On the other side, you've got, not just the other side, but in another section, you've got the product side. Products there are vast in all kinds. There's things like sonic vibrational equipment that can be utilized in conjunction with psychedelic experiences. You've got mycology growing equipment. You've got things like spores. You've got adaptogenic mushrooms. You've got blue lotus flower. You've got, amanita products. And then you've got full-on gray market products. You've got psilocybin. You've got DMT vape pens. You've got cactus-based products. We need more of those guys. We really only have one main guy, and I think he's overwhelmed. And we believe that restriction is extremely harmful. We're seeing baby boomers who aren't really that versed in the tech world and the web-based world being scammed, being sold bad products. We saw the Diamond Shrooms debacle in Utah. Really sad what happened there. So, even though that gray market space puts us in a challenging legal situation, the conviction there is too strong to let it go. People need to access these products regardless of the regulatory structure because they're going to anyway, and they're going to hurt themselves if they don't have a place that they can trust and go to. So we do have that side. And that works in conjunction with the treatment side. There are facilitators on there that need medicine, and they need a place where they know they can trust that medicine. There's a whole, I can go deeper into what we're doing there to vet and what the laboratory integration structures are that are being built, but I won't go too far into that because there's more, right? We've got the Learning Center, which is like our blog, our article center where you can learn about things. We're in the process. The focus, because I'm the sole investor, has been building the platform. We need to shift a bit. We need more input and more staff, curating articles, writing articles, things like that. We're going to be pivoting a bit more for that. We've got attorney section. So if you're looking for legal advice, you're looking to understand the regulatory environment, even for people who are just a little nervous, they're living in some place that's rather draconian around drug laws, and they're like, hey, can I get in trouble if I take mushrooms in my state? Maybe they want to hear that from a professional, what their risks are. And so we're trying to get more attorneys up. We don't have enough yet, but again, that's a side of it we're building. We've got a services section that offers a place for laboratories to list. They haven't yet because we started to integrate even further, and we're going to be having a very much integrated structure between merchants, product providers, and laboratories, and how that provides visible promotion on our website. So that's coming. We've got a schooling, training, kind of course resource section launching here in a couple of weeks. So people are going to be able to offer all types of courses. It's more third party. Psychedelics may offer courses, in-house courses eventually. We're not there yet. I'm too busy, but we've got things like people are going to offer mycology growing training courses, people offering courses on emotional process and trauma processing, right? People offering courses on how to become a facilitator, people offering courses about integration, about preparation, all of that stuff. We're looking forward to that. That's launching soon. So if you see, it's huge. It's an enormous platform. We're going to probably potentially integrate a Discord on there so you can have live discussions on the actual platform. There's a lot going to be going on the site, events, it's a big project.
Yeah, you got a brilliant team over there too that's working on it. You have made a lot of sacrifices and you've built out something I think is beautiful. And I would encourage everybody within the sound of my voice to go down to the show notes, check it out, reach out to Lewis. But as we're landing the plane here, Lewis, first off, I'm grateful, man. It's so cool to get to talk to you and have a long conversation. But if people are looking to find you, where can people find you? What do you got coming up? What are you excited about?
Yeah, so finding me is interesting because I just had an Instagram channel taken down. This happens all the time, guys. On X, you'll see it's a weird place, X, but it doesn't seem to do that to us. So I'm on there. I don't know what to think of it sometimes, but that's okay. I use the resources in front of me. Psychedelic. I don't really manage the personal channel on X at all. I'm not sure what's going on, but you'll find me constantly on the actual psychedelics channel. I think it's _psychedelics_. Instagram, we are still maintaining it mainly because of Josh, someone that you, I think, talked to first. He's been able to manage the _psychedelics_ Instagram. You can also find psychedelics.com / that's because we lost a channel on Facebook. You can find us there. You can also find my Louis Samuel Dorian content on actual Facebook, so you can find me there. Those are probably the main places where you can really see me and find me. There's a business line to the site. Indirectly, you can get to me there. There's an email address for the site, hello@psychedelics.com. It will reach me if someone's really trying to find me there. Those are the main ways. As far as what's coming up, the main things coming up are the launching of those features. We're really excited about those. That's the big thing, is that once we get those features launched, we're then pivoting towards, we want to build a panel that's somewhat we want to look at this from a democratic perspective on how do we set standards, how do we vet the treatment side. Vetting products, pretty simple and straightforward. Vetting treatment is way more difficult. There are people who have thoughts about really large retreats like Rhythmia, like Soltara in Costa Rica, 100 people in a single ayahuasca ceremony. Some people say that's wrong, that can't be done safely. We shouldn't be allowing that. Other people have anecdotal, very positive experiences there. I think people need to come together as a panel of, folks that are absolute experts in those, experiences of treating and facilitating and offering psychedelics to people, and have discussions about this. We want to put that together so that we can find some sort of metric to manage the treatment, environment that's on our platform and maybe even beyond, because we need some sort of standards. And even though we talked about how maybe at odds that is with the psychedelic experience, when you start to really engage at a very highly public level and massive consumerism, you have to find some framework, some sort of understanding of how do we say, well, we endorse this retreat center, we endorse this clinic, we endorse these people, right? And I think you have to have some sort of observance of what they're doing, making sure, there should be some standards. I think around facilitation with individuals, even of the opposite sex, anytime there's maybe somatic healing and things, we need multiple people in the room. We need oversight, the same way you would have in a surgery or something like that, where it's like, we know that you're not, human nature is full of temptation. People do stupid things. I think that should be one of the standards, where there's multiple facilitators in circumstances of there could be a deep amount of vulnerability, right? We're looking into things like that. So those are the things I'm really excited to get involved with, and start traveling more, start going to these retreats that are, in Costa Rica, in Peru, in the Netherlands, going there, seeing what they're doing. I'm excited about getting to that point. Not there yet, but that's what's going to be coming next.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, hang on briefly afterwards, Louis, but to everybody else within the sound of my voice, I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining, the birds are singing. That's all we got, ladies and gentlemen. Go down to the show notes. Check out Louis. Aloha.